Hello, federal employees. This is Sierra with Plan Your Federal Retirement. Thank you for joining me on today's Fall Friday, where I will be covering the highlights and action items from this week's episode. In episode 92, Micah Shilanski and our special guest advisors, JT Farron and Krish Sakamoto, discussed estate planning. This summer, we committed to reviewing all of our clients' estate planning documents. Micah said that one of the most important things is to talk about the document that everyone has to have. Now, we can't give legal advice, but we can look at these documents from a financial planning perspective and how working with our clients throughout their lives, we get to see the implementation of these documents. JT kicks us off by telling us what the 3 estate planning documents that everyone should have, which are a will, durable power of attorney, and advanced healthcare directive. Mike expands on this and says that a durable power of attorney is the most powerful document that you're ever going to sign because you're giving someone else the right to make any financial decisions on your behalf. The advanced healthcare directive comes into effect if a doctor declares that you're incapacitated and that you can't make your own medical decisions. Then someone can step in and help make those medical decisions on your behalf. Just because you're married doesn't make your spouse automatically have these rights. And on the medical side, with HIPAA, your spouse doesn't have the right to access your medical records either. On the financial side, for example, like your thrift savings plan, that account is in your name and doesn't have a joint account with your spouse. If you are incapacitated, how then can you give these consents to your spouse in those examples? For the third document, Christian jumps in and expands on how the will comes into play and explains that it only becomes in effect when you pass away. The will then guides the probate process and dictates where your assets are going to go. Christian also explains that there's an order of operations. First, things transfer by title. Think your house title, car title, and your bank accounts. If you have a joint title, then it will transfer automatically to that person. The next order of operation is by beneficiaries on your accounts. Everything else that did not have a title or a beneficiary, that's where the will comes in and directs where those assets are going to go. Micah brings up that it's important to review your beneficiaries regularly. He's seen clients who have not updated their beneficiaries in decades and didn't realize that they had their ex-spouse as a beneficiary. They think that the updates don't need to take place because their will states their new wishes. But this is why the order of operations is so important. The titling and then beneficiaries come before the will. Another example is that your will states that you want your house to go to someone else, but the title is joint with your spouse. It won't then matter what your will dictated. JT explains that clients normally have a one-off transaction with an estate planning attorney to set up these documents. But as financial advisors, we get the opportunity to see how these documents and how their situation changes throughout their life. For example, marriage, divorce, people passing away, children growing up. Micah makes a point that you also have to consider how the taxes are going to affect the beneficiaries as well. Christian mentions that he has a client with a blended family, 2 people who are married but each had children in a previous marriage. The biggest question is, how do we plan in that situation when the first spouse passes away and then the second spouse? How each set of kids are going to receive the money and thinking about how you can accidentally and unintentionally disinherit family. Christian said that they discussed in this example using a trust to accomplish their wishes in that situation. Micah thinks about when his kids turn 18, does he want them to inherit that much money, and thinking about those sorts of things. Micah uses what he calls the pillow test, where if you lay your head down at night, sleep like a baby about the decisions you made, and do you worry about the people that you've elected to take care of those things as well? Christian also brings up that with the advanced healthcare directive, you make elections ahead of time so that your loved one doesn't have to make those decisions for you and that they also would know what your wishes are. For example, do you want artificial nutrition? Do you want to stay plugged in? Christian says that if you're not married and have a spouse, then you have to think about, is this person that I'm electing to make these decisions for me, are they close enough to me to know what my wishes would be in different scenarios? Micah brings up that it's okay if you want one person to make your medical decisions, but you want somebody else to make your financial decisions. It does not have to be the same person for each of those documents. JT talks about the will and how that comes into play when you pass away, and the importance of who you name as the executor of the estate because it's a big job. They have a lot to do, so you would want to name someone who is responsible, that you trust, and who is up to the task. Naming a secondary or even a tertiary person is a great idea. And maybe the people that you elected 20 years ago when you initially named them were up for the task, and maybe 20 years later, they're not up to the task anymore at the time of your passing. So having those different levels of people is a really good idea. Micah brings up that he really likes trusts, but they're not necessary for everyone and it's optional. Micah personally likes them because you can control and parent from the grave, and it's private because it doesn't go through the probate process. JT mentions that in Alaska, when you own land, you can do a transfer on death on your title. In other states that don't have this option, having the trust own the property might make a lot of sense instead. Christian adds, with the example of a blended family, a trust makes sense in that case to help parent from the grave and having things to go to certain people as they wish. This podcast is all about action items for our listeners. Micah's action item is to create an estate planning flowchart of your assets so you can see how things were transferred and who's in charge of those things. JT's action item is to review and update your estate planning documents if you need to, especially if they're several years old. And Christian's action item is to get these documents in place if you do not have them already. It's super important to do that. Re-listen to the original episode 92 to hear the great conversation between Micah, Christian, and JT. And finally, share this podcast with a friend. With your help, we can achieve our goal of helping 1 million federal employees just like you. Until next time, happy planning.